There's a lot of things that we as humanity are going to be going through. What we have inside us is going to blow our mind. When you ignite and open the infinity point gateway in the center of the heart, that is a direct access to the living source intelligence behind everything. We're starting to learn about the fluidity, the expansiveness of living energetics. Nikola Tesla is one of those people that had such a beautiful perception to see these things. Humanity consciously just wasn't ready to work with the type of energies that he was working with. There is this collective shift towards greater ascension, being fully embodied with the high self within the heart intelligence itself. This is happening in a more accelerated way. People's ability to perceive energetics they didn't see before, see emanations of this source intelligence in different forms, starts to come forward. This galaxy is teeming with life because of the experience that we as humanity are going through. So many eyes of all these advanced races are focused here right now. We actually have aspects of these master races within our DNA. What they are excited about is my higher self and my team said, right, okay, it's time now. On you go. This is the path you're going to take. And so I ended up going from somebody who the leaving words of my teachers were saying, this guy will never be a mathematician. I was such a hopeless case. And my parents were like, oh my God, what are we going to do with this kid, you know? To then going to university. And I started with doing 2 degrees side by side. So I did a degree in mathematics and physics and amalgamated them. So I was effectively doing 2 degrees at the same time, and everyone thought I was crazy for doing that, particularly because I'd never shown any, sort of predilection for any of that stuff beforehand. I said, no, I really want to do this. I don't know why, can't explain it. I really feel I have to do this. You know? So I jumped in and just absolutely rocketed with it. And then I went on to do, and at this time, although from my very early beginnings, I was very interested in everything going on up there. I wanted to know everything I could find of witnesses, people who had experiences. I just wanted to really just digest that stuff. So that was running concurrently with all of this happening. And I was still super interested. I used to love to sit under the stars, gaze around, wonder what was out there, who was out there, what was going on. And then I did a series of degrees. So then I did a master's in mathematics, bolted onto that. Then a master of advanced study in theoretical physics after that. And then I did my PhD at Oxford in string theory or superstring theory. And it was in my first year, I guess at that point, I don't know if that's where you wanted to take this, but that's when everything started to change. Because at that point, I was right in the game of being a theoretical physicist. That's where I wanted to go. And when I started my PhD, I thought, cool, I really want to pull back the covers to understand what are the inner workings of the universe. How is it all put together? How does it function? And then about it, sort of just before a year had finished into my PhD, I was starting to get this, unbeknownst to me at the time, this sort of intuitive feeling that all wasn't well. What I was learning and researching and developing, I thought, oh, okay, this wasn't quite the magical kind of opening of the veil that I thought that it would be. And from what you were talking about beforehand, it sounds like you had a similar experience there. That there was something felt completely out of place, and what I was doing was not going to be this grand unveiling where I could get to understand what was happening underneath. So that really brought me to just a place where I thought, well, what do I do now? I'm in year 1. I've got 3 more years to go. And, either I get this done or I jump ship, And about then, I went back to my dorm and I started searching online. And I found connections to, I was using certain words like energy, vacuum, all sorts of keywords. I was just trying to search for something to give me some inspiration. And I came across Tom Bearden's work, and I'm sure many of your people, and probably yourself, know who Tom Bearden is, a bit of a legend in the area of energy from the vacuum. Thought, whoa, if you guys are actually doing this is holy cow stuff. I want to be doing that, So I wrote him an email. I didn't expect anything to come back. And next day he did. I was absolutely beside myself with excitement. I thought, cool, yeah, excellent, here we go, And so, yeah, he was so stoked that somebody from a sort of a mainstream, very revered academic institution like Oxford was getting in touch. I said, are you kidding? Look at the stuff you're doing. I want to know everything, And so we struck up a bit of a friendship, and he sent me a bunch of stuff. And then he said, well, I've got some contacts in the UK. I'll introduce you and let's form a sort of collaboration. So side by side with my research at Oxford, I was having a secret life during the nighttime, running away with these guys and working with them. And I almost got into trouble for it because obviously, the way that these big institutions work, we'd actually published a paper with these other guys and they had found it and said, you're not doing this anymore. You're going to stop that and you're going to focus on what you're doing. And I thought, how on earth did you find that out? Something was going on behind the scenes. It just seems so incalculably improbable that they would find this. So that was my first little foray into thinking, okay, well, maybe all is not quite as it seems on the surface here, But about a year into that, just after I'd met Tom Bearden, we were striking this thing up. A friend of mine bought me a book for my birthday. And it was to do with everything to do with ESP, encounters, witnesses. It was a whole kind of volume about all these amazing sort of extrasensory things. And I started reading, and there was one particular chapter about remote viewing that really got my attention. And when I read what these people were, these were professional people, and they had these experiences where they had bilocated and could viscerally see and interact with other worlds and do crazy things. I thought, wow, okay, if this is for real, I want to have a shot at this. I want to have a go. So I went online, searched for a different, is anybody offering training? Can I do this? That kind of thing. And I found a company that offers a box set of videos to self-train, and then you do the exercises, you go through all the examples. And so I got to the end of the training, and you get this first example. So for people who are not familiar with remote viewing, it's like a postcard or a picture of the target. You don't see it, you don't open it up yet. And on the envelope or on the back of the card is a number or a series of numbers written. And so the person who looked at that target will say, okay, I'm going to consciously identify that these numbers is the address of this target, effectively. So when a remote viewer does that, they locate the numbers, and that takes their consciousness to the location in the superconsciousness where those numbers were located to. So anyway, I began the process, and when I got to the middle of the target, because you can just consciously move yourself around the space or the target wherever you are, suddenly this rumbling starts appearing in my ears. I thought, whoa, okay, what's going on there? And then it kept going, and I thought, is that outside? I thought, opened my eyes for a second. I thought, no, that's definitely inside me, And so I kept going, and it got louder and stronger and, more visceral. And then eventually I started feeling this hot liquid flowing up and down my body, as if literally I was standing in like a hot flow of water or something. It was weird. And I kept going, and then suddenly I started having, visuals of the target where I was, and I thought, okay, I'm time to put my pen down. This is getting a little bit too far from my first time. Went out, had a 10-minute conversation with a friend, trying to let these sensations fall away, and they kept going, and they just eventually, after about 10 minutes, they subsided and went away. So I thought, okay, they've gone. Okay, I'm going to go back into my bedroom, flip the card over. It was a volcano. So literally, all those effects that I was feeling was being super saturated with the target I was remote viewing. And so for me, as a first experience to test this out and to see if it was actually working, I thought that for me was proof positive that this was actually for real. But that really just got me going on this idea. So because I had no idea about the higher self, multidimensional aspects. And like I said recently in another interview, to me, multidimensional at that point meant just different dimensions in string models that I was working on. The idea of a multidimensional self just wasn't in my head at all. But then I started to have this connection and this sort of wish to really reach out and search for the deeper aspects of human consciousness, the higher self. And eventually I came across and did this course called Pleiadian Lightwork. And it was then when I had the first contact telepathically with the Pleiadians. And they were incredibly beautiful people, extremely intelligent, very compassionate, very kind. And they had a lot of guidance to offer about healing and removing different aspects of blocks, filters, all that kind of stuff to better clarify and bring more of a crystal clarity, if you like, to extrasensory perception and the ability to perceive energy, the ability to download and center within the higher self. So that was my first contact. And at that point, I got invited to take part in a documentary called Energy from the Vacuum by Tom Bearden, and had sort of invited me over to take part. So I got this really cool sort of stoked out experience of going to Tom's place, meeting him personally, having a great time with Tom, and then meeting John Bedini, who's another maverick legend in the field of energy from the vacuum. It was a crazy, crazy experience. I was like this sort of country bumpkin kid, being invited across to take part in this thing. And I'm like, what the heck am I doing here? It's like all these amazing people have done incredible things, And it was a surreal experience. It really was. I mean, the stories, a lot of stories, I could tell you sort of, in person, and there are way too many to go in one interview. But the stories and the things that they showed me were just incredible. They really were. And some of them was like, okay, this is definitely out of my league. I think I should go home now. So it was really, really cool stuff. And, I'm just sort of wondering how much to go into that, because a lot of it gets very, very,
I think we'd be fascinated by it. Like, the idea of free energy is really intriguing.
Yeah, to give you a little bit of background to those who aren't familiar with Tom and John, but to give a bit more context. So it was really funny with John. I remember talking to him on the phone one time. I said, just out of interest, how did you get into this? How did it all start? And we were chatting, and he said, well, a long time ago, he was in the Air Force, the U.S. Air Force. And he was stationed at a place that was it used to be a U.S. Air Force base, but then became RAF Bruggen, or the Royal Air Force. And I said, hang on a second, in Germany? I said, yeah. I said, that's crazy, because I used to be in the Air Cadet Force, because I was going to be a pilot. I wanted to be before I went to university, I wanted to be an Air Force pilot. And I said we were stationed there for like a week for an experienced training thing, exactly where you were. I said that of all the places to be, I was literally at the same place that you were. It's crazy. And he was telling me the story that he was tasked to go down into these old Second World War bunkers and decommission these old planes that were still sitting there. And he said that he and a bunch of the other sort of tech crew were down there, and they were just larking around, and they'd get in the cockpit and start playing with things just for fun. And they flicked the on switch, and it came on fully bright, as if it was just fully charged, ready to go. And he said to me, that's strange, because the batteries on these things should have been dead decades ago. We're talking about old World War II aircraft, right? So I said, well, how so he said, they all started looking around the aircraft, and they finally found this hatch where this little box with a dial in it. And he said they just left the whole thing on, and it would eventually just run down. And they figured eventually that when they switched the dial, it would all come back on as if brand new again. And all they had to do was keep flicking the dial whenever the instruments would just fade away. And he said he found this so intriguing, he started to do some research and found an old patent that Nikola Tesla had made called shuttling currents. And it was a device where, if you had, as John explained it to me, if you had an old-fashioned DC electric motor and you had 3 batteries, and you inverted the pole of one of the batteries and let it run, he said he finds that the middle one that's inverted charges faster than the other 2 drain. And so that's what got him into it. And that's what made him realize that there's something very funky going on with energy that's non-conventional. So that's how he started. But it was very funny that, I was sort of just for a week stationed at the same base that he actually had that experience at, which I had no idea that
The
sort of stuff was
serendipity.
going
Yeah,
on.
the serendipity of it. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And so anyway, so I got introduced to John from Tom Bearden. And John was a fantastic guy. And I got to meet John personally for the first time. And this conversation I just mentioned took place after we'd met. And the thing that was so cool about John for the first time, so when I went there, because John had all sorts of things happen to him because of the nature of his work. So he was a little bit skeptical about me to start with, like, who's this kid? Where are you coming from? What are you up to? And as we sort of just laughed and joked and settled down, and Tom was a great guy because he used to swear like a trooper, but he was so funny about it. He was just a real muck around guy, just loved to play around, just joke all the time. And we would after he got used to me and he realized, I'm on his side, and I'd love to know more about what he was doing. He took me into this room. So we had this big industrial unit, and about, say, maybe just less than a quarter of that was this sort of wood fabricated sort of partition on, part of it where he kept all of his energy devices running. And I'm not kidding you. Before I describe the next bit, these devices were literally one of his main ones was just a bicycle wheel with, it's so DIY and so off the shelf. Anyone could get this stuff and put it together with a bunch of magnets literally sellotaped on the outside with this little coil at the bottom and a little circuit. And as these things are running, they would produce this amazing energy. And that was my first real feel of what I now call living energy physics or living energetics. Because the partition that he had, there was a sort of front door with the two front doors missing. So it was just a hole where two swing doors should be. And there was no roof on this partition either. And you couldn't feel anything until you walked past the threshold of this room. And then suddenly the entire energetic of the environment would just goes really high. And you could really feel it. And then you could just move your arm through the air, and it felt like the air was just alive or charged with some kind of energetic that I couldn't put my finger on at the time. I thought, wow, this is really palpable. This isn't just kind of oh, yeah, that's kind of cool in here. It was really strong, And so anyway, and then I thought, whoa, what's going on here? And then I backed out the door, and then it just went really heavy and dense. And then I went through the threshold again, and up it went again. And I remember looking at John, looking at me, and he was like, what's up with you, man? It's like, I think he thought I was some sort of crazy guy or something. And so, yeah, and we did this whole interview with him in there, and he showed me all of his devices, and there's a whole range of them that he built. He even had this whole bank of submarine batteries he would charge and then run his entire industrial unit off them, all that kind of cool stuff. It was pretty awesome stuff. And it was such an honor and a privilege to be, somebody who had been invited into this kind of arena by these amazing, amazing people.
Hey there, guys. Hopefully you're loving this conversation. I'd just love to take a quick moment of your time to ask for a special favor and request. Please hit subscribe to the channel. The entire channel you're witnessing, you're participating in, you're a part of here is empowered by your subscription. It's you that powers this channel along. Please take a moment to hit subscribe. Thank you so much in advance. Back to the episode.
So yeah, I don't know if you have any questions or you want to take any tangents on that. But
just it's fascinating considering the entire energetics of that. And I'm just wondering, for me, at what point are you going through the shifts that you're having? Because you've already started your process and energetics around remote viewing. You've started having that volcano experience that you described. So that's been validated. You're now starting to come into free energy. And then interestingly, you said you made star contact. That's really interesting as well. Like, what was that how did that happen? Was that, because I think that's, for some people, they don't even know Pleiadians, and it's really interesting to hear that you've actually made contact to another potentially star system, which is really, I'm sure some people are skeptical that are tuning in. Yeah.
Yeah, I was to begin with as well. I mean, I come from a background which is highly, highly skeptical of a lot of things. That's part of the training. So it took a little bit of acclimation, I guess you could say, and transforming, and it actually made it very difficult because when I had these contact experiences, with the Pleiadians and other beings that, refer to themselves as Arcturians, they wanted to help fine tune and help me hone my ideas and perception, most importantly, about energy itself. Because one of the things they were very, very clear about was that humanity has a very, very, what's the word to use? A very off the rails understanding or view of what energy is. We tend to think of it as just it's either kinetic or it's potential, and it just keeps swapping between the two.
So can I ask
And
just at that juncture, because I do want to, sorry, just a little bit of context. Sorry, I hate to
sure, no
interrupt.
worries. Yeah, go
Because
ahead.
and I want us to pick up just where we are, if that's possible. But in terms of context, were you already with like doing the work with Tom and them prior to this point?
Oh, I
Or
see.
had
Yeah.
you been like, had your journey kind of primed you and then contact happened? Or did contact happen and then you started researching more around this?
My first contact with the Pleiadians happened before I met John. So
Interesting.
I'd met Tom, and I'd had this discussion with him, and I had the contact then. So it was kind of hard to balance these concurrent events that were happening, and it took a lot of sort of stabilization and integration to have a sort of happy balance of all these things, because I was still an academic physicist. I was working with Tom and John on their sort of, very, very off the cuff, devices and investigations into different versions of physics. And also with these contacts I was having with these beings that were trying to help me understand the nature of energy. And one of the things that was very, very difficult for me in the beginning, they would give me these ideas and say, here we go, play with that. And then straight away, my mathematical mind would try and jump in and try and model it and crunch it to pieces. And the whole sort of experience of it would just go bleh, all flat, and it would just go to nothing. And that kept happening. And I got a little bit frustrated. And I thought, why does this keep happening? I get these really great inspirational ideas and they just goes bleh. And then, yeah, pretty much. And then what happened was they came in and they said, essentially what's happening is we're trying to teach you to have a perceptibility from a much more deeper intelligence, which is your heart intelligence. And what you are trying to do, you are trying to take high dimensional qualities and you're trying to quantify them or mechanically block them into these structures that your mind is so familiar with doing, and it's not going to work. And they're saying this is part of the reason why human culture has struggled to, other than people like the Nikola Teslas or those kind of people, have struggled to understand the deeper nature of the living quality of energy itself. And that's a key part because, the technologies that these beings have, the Arcturians in particular, their tech, as far as the information I've been given, and I've heard from other people who are experiences as well, is that their tech is so renowned throughout this entire galaxy. It's unbelievably profound. And it's all organic, living, energetic technology. It's not like what we use, And what we use is very clunky. We try to gate and shunt and push and pull and force things in circuits, in mechanics, you name it. It's all just very almost caveman-like ways of making energy behave to perform a function that we want. And now living energetics is a whole different kettle of fish. It literally responds to you consciously. You can interact with it. It moves and morphs with you, and depending on your conscious state and what it is that you're doing. That's not how normal energetics and energetic structures or mechanical structures work. You look at a wall and say move. It's just going to sit there and do nothing.
Stare at you. Yeah.
It doesn't work. And it's all down to densification, because when you compress, magnetically compress and confine living fluid fields, They become so confined that the behavior of that energy packet now becomes so limited. All it can do now is just bounce off things, do basic sort of physical interactions, transfer momentum, all those kind of things is essentially what it does. But when you learn to release the compression, everything comes off, it then starts to behave differently. The living qualities, what underlies structure. And one way to understand this in a visual way is if you imagine this unending ocean, and that it's all pure liquid, it's a living organism, and you can move your hands through it, and it's just part of the medium you're in. Now let's say you form little ice blocks within that medium, and then you start to collect those condensed, crystallized forms of that medium together into a structure, into, say, a group of atoms, into a molecule, and then from a molecule into cells, and cells into a big organism. That essentially is, in a nutshell, in a very simplistic way, my understanding from my teams, as they call them, that what we see as structure is just a high compression of energy coded in such a way that it behaves with the physics that we see it has. But essentially, it's literally mirroring what we, as a perceiver being, that we are requesting to see. A lot of people have talked about the quantum domain and how, quantum experiments seem to adjust themselves when the observer is either looking or not looking, and so on and so forth. And there's absolute truth to that. And it underlies in the idea, in my view, of living energetics, because we're living in a sea of quantum fields. Quantum fields are morphic, and they do change themselves to the perceiver. And so as a species, we've been sort of very, very, over a long, long period of time, we've conditioned ourselves to perceive structure, density, mechanics, all the other things. So what we see outside of us is a perception of exactly that. And fundamentally, this goes in part with the conscious development that humanity is undergoing, because and this is what my teams have said, that the more we begin to move into that colossal heart-centered intelligence, and I know there's a lot of stigma attached to the heart and words called love and things like that, because people think, oh, it's just there, yeah, that's just woo-woo, whatever, But the truth is, these very advanced races are very much centered there, and that is how they can do this. They do have exceptional minds as well, but their minds are essentially instruments of, or bridged to, from that source intelligence in their heart center, the sacred heart, so that their mind becomes an instrument or an applicator of that intelligence that comes through. The mind isn't the governing aspect, it's the instrument in a way. So that's how they operate. And so they have access, because they have access to that level of perception, which is not fettered by structure, because the mind itself is a structure. It's a very beautiful structure, but it perceives and calculates and does everything in terms of structural processes. But the heart center works beyond that. It works in fluid living energetic fields, much deeper levels of perception than the mind can ever go. But I believe that the mind was always designed as an applicator in structural worlds so that you could function and do things in physical worlds. But if you can simultaneously have that deep level of perception, that core anchoring into your sacred heart, where your true intelligence is, and have your mind as an extension of that, that's where the Arcturians are. That's what they do. And, the Pleiadians are these very advanced races. And they can see things about quantum fields, high-dimensional energetics that we simply cannot, because using the mind as a perceptive tool shuts you out from an entire plethora of things that are going on around you that you just don't know are there. And this is part of the trouble with mainstream physics. And I believe, looking back, that was my difficulty in feeling that there was something missing, there was something not quite right there. Because ultimately, physics and mathematics are pure structural languages to try to map or sort of choreograph what is seen in front of them and put it down in a formulated language. But as I say to people, numbers themselves are structure, but what's underneath or beneath or within the numbers? And that's the thing. So a mathematical language can never go beyond the foundation of which it is based on, which is numbers. And what we actually need is a quantum language, a quantum version of mathematics, because the mathematics we have is all based on numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all those kind of things. They never change. They are strict, unchanging structures relative to each other, and we can build all sorts of, we can build all sorts of functions and maps and whatever you want to describe or map or correlate to physical processes. But in the quantum domain, numbers don't have any number until they're observed. They're fluid, they're morphic, they move, disappear. It's a very different realm of understanding, and it's something that we as humanity are going to have to go through a little bit of a change to grasp this, because it's something that you cannot articulate or quantify using the mind. You have to perceive it from this higher intelligence in the heart center, and then have the mind as an extension be the applicator of that knowledge and understanding as you perceive it. So it is quite a jump, and I had, like I said, I had great difficulties in the beginning because I was so boxed in with how things are supposed to work, how I approach things, that jumping from that to where my teams were saying, and one example was that the Arcturians are trying to help me build a toroidal type of coiling system. And I was building this, and I was getting frustrated. And I said, I'm trying to get what you're saying, but I'm. And they said, no, you're going back into, you're going back into mental mode. Yeah, you're becoming a mental guy again.
You're going mental.
You're going mental. Yeah, exactly, exactly. And and they came in and they said, just very gently and very softly, they said, come back into your heart space. We're trying to get you to understand that even though you are making something physical, and it has a sort of degree of sort of scientific physics, approach to it, what we want you to understand is underlyingly the energy that this is going to produce, you're going to perceive from here. You won't perceive it from here. And so relax, just bring yourself back into center, switch it on. What do you feel? What do you perceive? And the energy emanation of this device was, again, off the charts. It was, the environment really raised up really significantly. And they were saying, this is one of the key things. They were teaching me, every time we give you something, you immediately try to go into, mind mode. They're saying, one of the key things for humanity to do is to get playful. Have the experience. Put your fingers in it, get your fingers dirty, play around with it, feel it, experience it, almost like a young child with a jelly mold would do. They want to play with it, they want to throw it around, they want to eat it, they were saying, be very visible, because you will have a relationship to the energetics that you are trying to understand. And you can only really get that by experiencing it and playing with it. And I realized that's one of the things that physicists, and particularly myself, get wrong, is because we're so used to working in offices, having this mental perception or conceptual idea of, yes, this is how the universe is in my mind, and I'm just going to build this entire model based on what it is. And it just isn't like that from my experience with these beings and these energetics at all. It's such a different landscape altogether. It really is.
This podcast is brought to you by my one-to-one mentorship. The podcast is designed to inspire your evolution onwards, upwards, and inwards. And if you're ready to dive in even deeper and evolve your career, your leadership, and business in a conscious direction, and you believe that alignment to your purpose and your soul's direction is the only way to truly thrive into your highest potential, and right now you can feel that guidance, mentoring, and coaching would be of support, then my one-to-one mentorship, coupled with our incredible conscious group masterminds, is here for you. Thousands of people have evolved through my mentoring over the last 10 years. It is, after all, my highest calling, and here's what they have to say about how it's transformed their life.
I've had massive transitions while working with Amrit.
I'm processing things in real time. I'm addressing what I want to do, and so much more is possible.
Amrit sessions were really helpful. They inspired me to go after my dream job, which I have now, and I'm loving it.
Amrit doesn't really see it as just coaching, but he honestly cares about you, and you can feel it. That's just priceless. I just love it.
If you're looking for someone to help you evolve as a person, hands down, Amrit.
So if you're ready to dive in even deeper to take your inspirations and truly evolve, then make your way over to my website at amritsandu.com. I'll put a link in the description below. You don't have to go it alone. There's one-to-one mentoring and an incredible community mastermind of conscious leaders, entrepreneurs, and people transforming their careers and business into full alignment with their soul's highest calling, creating a life that inspires them on the deepest level, living into their greatest impact. And as many of you know, connection is my highest value, so I'm looking forward to connecting with you. Use the button below, use the link below, amritsandu.com/call. That's AMRIT Sandhu, SANDHU.com/call. It's on screen for you now. And if you follow that link, you'll be able to book in a call directly with me. I'm looking forward to connecting with you. So go on, I'll see you there. It's fascinating because, I mean, there's that element, and I think we could easily rush past it in the conversation, but I just wanted to sort of shine a light on it. We as a beer and what we want to see coming into reality more and more. I mean, the observer effect in quantum physics is quite profound when you start to tune in. I mean, when you start to untether ones and zeros and what's beneath there and actually trying to come up with a whole new way of or even the word quantifying is based on ones and zeros. So I kind of lose my base in the conversation here, but it's quite profound. One of the questions that emerges is the energetics that you're sort of experiencing seem to be of a subtler nature, or are there potentially like energetics that can actually power homes and stuff like that?
Well, what I would say is that there one of the things that these races are keen to do is to have humanity, and this is nothing that they don't force anything because it's not in their nature. When you get to be of that heart perception, force just isn't part of the issue at all. It's not. Now, one of the things that is keeping humanity from so many different amazing innovations is because there needs to be a sort of evolution of perception in a way. And it's to do with how we are requesting energy to present it to ourselves. Now, as a collective on this earth, if you like, for a long time we have grown to and also been influenced to see things in a very solid, mechanical, quantifiable way, as if there's nothing beyond quantification or quantization. But the truth is, there's a whole new thing waiting underneath that. Now, that is what is changing, and in my view, what's actually happening is people are beginning very, very, very gently within themselves, as part of their evolution, encouraged to come to let go of what they're grasping hold of, let go of what you think you know. Let go of what you think you're grasping onto as, yes, this is correct. I've seen this. This is true. I'm not going to let go of this. And what my teams were saying to me is, when you can learn to soften your perception and when you can learn to perceive from here, you'll have a view of things unlike you've ever seen before. And what I call physics is just another name for energy behavior. And the two are interchangeable. Physics is just the study of energy in different forms and its relationship to other forms, and so on. And so fundamentally, there's going to be a shift in how we understand the actual nature of energy itself. Because at the moment, like I said, physics doesn't see energy as anything other than just it's either kinetic or it's potential. And then you have that in different systems in different various degrees, and they interchange and all things sort of happen. And that's basically, in a nutshell, physics as we know it today. But what happens if, when you look at a deeper level of energy, it starts to become a living aspect? It starts to behave differently. What happens when you take the compression fields off and suddenly the high compression, high limitation that almost distorts and compresses the field down to become, say, a subatomic particle or an atom or a molecule and so forth? What happens when that comes off and then suddenly there's this living intelligent quality, this field quality to the atom or the molecule, the cell, the body, that starts to change the behavior of everything around it? Because what we have right now, as I said before, is everything behaving in such an almost dead mechanical state
2D almost, like a flat sort of experience as opposed to like a living dialogue that we can have with it. Sorry, I interrupted. Sorry.
No, absolutely. Jump at any time. If you want to focus on anything, I'm absolutely happy to do that. Now, the thing is, when you create these devices, and I had this first experience when I went into John's lab and then created my own devices as well, this energy that comes off, it's not just a field that just sits there and just does physics things. When you go into a meditative state, or if you get near it, it will actually respond to you. It actually works with you as a conscious perceiver. It's very different, and that's part of the issue. I can't emphasize enough the aspect of humanity needing to jump from a dead mechanical energetic physics to a living energy physics, which is going to take humanity in a totally different way. Because, for example, let me give you another example. The second law of thermodynamics. I'm sure many people have heard that floated around in different guises all over the place. And essentially what that means is if you have a closed box and you have a gas in there, that entropy measures the disorder of the gas, how chaotic it is, essentially. And what the second law says is you can only break even, it can only maintain the same level of chaos, or it can get worse, more chaotic. You can't go back. It can't go into self-ordering, basically. Now, one of the things that is so cool about some of these devices, one in particular was one that an inventor that John worked with, and he had this device, and it produced an enormous amount of energy, and he accidentally crossed the terminals, the output. It reminds me of Ghostbusters, don't cross the streams, And anyway, so he accidentally shorted out the output, and instead of going bang and melting the wires, there was a bang, but ice formed on the wires. It froze. Yeah. So in other words, instead of being an entropic or an entropy increasing instrument to increase the chaos and put in heat and make things go bang and blur, it suddenly came into this suddenly rapid crystallization and freezing process. So this energy behaves in a very different way than we're used to. And one of the things that I've learned from my teams is that when there is a sufficient presence of this living intelligent energy, it can organize. That's what it does. It intelligently organizes things. So the second law of thermodynamics is true enough if there's no intelligent field that is actually spontaneously organizing the gas in that chamber. And I believe that's why physics keeps repeatedly seeing it, because this presence of this living intelligent field system behind matter itself doesn't make itself known enough because of the high compression. So everything looks like it behaves the way physics says it does. But what I've seen is many examples, from John's work and Tom's work and my own, replication of their work and making my own devices, is that there is this living intelligent field that emanates when you have the language correct of the coiling system. And one of the interesting things about the coils is they have to be wound like a DNA helix. So that's a very significant key right there. So if you just use straight wires, you don't get this effect. But if you spin energy along a helix, and to me, there's no coincidence that our DNA helix is like a giant sort of spiralectic, if that's a word, quantum energy system that uses almost like a fiber optic that can spin light codes, spin living energies in such a way, because most people are familiar with the idea that DNA codes proteins, it splits itself open, it does the coding and then comes back together, and all the usual physical processes. But there was a guy called Dr. Peter Garyev, a Russian scientist, who was messing around with the idea of, he said, okay, he would take a hermetically sealed container of one species, say like a salamander egg, and one with a frog egg. And he would shine a laser, and hermetically sealed means that no liquids, no gases, it's completely sealed. And he would shine a laser through one onto the other one. And the one where the laser was going to would start changing DNA-wise into the species that the laser was shining through. So in other words, it was an example of coded energetics, living energetics, where the light would pick up and take genetic information and carry it and imprint it onto the developing embryos and change, their species type, which is incredible. And he did other experiments where he would shine laser light in DNA strands and watch them. And then even after he had taken the physical material of the DNA away, the light kept doing that as if it was going like a fiber optic up and down the DNA. It kept doing that. Eventually it dissipated, but it kept on doing that for a number of days, as far as I know. So there are glimpses into this, and there are people who have, done different experiments to show this. But part of the unfolding, there's a one-to-one relationship with how we develop as conscious creators and perceivers, and what we're actually able to perceive and see. And so as we change our perception from living dead mechanics to living fluid energetics, more possibilities of innovations like the ones you suggested are going to come into play. And I think Nikola Tesla in history is one of those people that had such a beautiful, open, able perception to see these things, that he was able to do it, and able to make these applications and put them into practice, basically. So yeah, definitely. I hope that's a very long way of answering your question. But
it's fascinating. And I think the thing that's really sticking for me in this conversation at the moment is the expectation. The expectory, sort of like physics keeps seeing the same thing that it expects itself to see. And so that expectation is collapsing
yes.
wave into particle, in pun intended, but literally, it's what it's, and every time we're going to witness the same thing. But if we change the expectations, and hence that sense of play that you're inviting in, or that your team's inviting in there. One of the questions that comes up for me is, because we're leaning into it now, which is this, our consciousness, because actually you've got some meditations that have been incredible for people to experience. I mean, the profound shift that happens for them based on this is not your average experience. So we're going to start talking more about consciousness, but I think as we get into that, I think there is this question, and maybe that can bridge us from energy into consciousness, which is, well, the question in its nature for me is like, why now and how come now, and that's kind of the essence underneath it, because part of me wonders if we are still like energy and learning more about this sort of stuff. Like when we're handed technology, like there's already this kind of fear on the planet, with one person's got a button on this nuclear button, another person's got a button on this nuclear button, and can we be trusted not to press the button, and then you start talking about sending the technology that you're discussing into like a whole nother hyperdrive, it sort of seems almost. Are we ready for such a technology? But the fact that it's potentially coming through means potentially we are, and it is safe to be trusted. Like, can you see the nature of kind of what I'm pointing to then? It's like, why now? And the dangers associated with it? Or are we in fact safe to be granted with it? Or does that also highlight that we are in our consciousness actually has evolved to a certain degree to be able to be trusted with it, and that's why it's coming through now? I'll stop talking, ask the question. That's the question.
No, it's fine. No, I totally get what you're saying. And here's a very cool, I'm glad that you asked that, because there's something very cool to that. And that is, with my experience of this energy, you cannot get it to perform harm. That's one of the beautiful things about it. It will not be used for harm. It simply won't do it. Because the fundamental source intelligence, so you mentioned the meditations, and they were a number of different races that wanted to give those, but recently it's come through the source intelligence. When you ignite and open the infinity point gateway in the center of the heart, that is a direct access that we all have to the living source intelligence behind everything. Each of us has that. Now, when I started to open this up and I started getting these informations, these understandings from the source intelligence within that gateway in the center of the heart, I began to realize, and it made me link together my experiences with this energy, is that it is biased for life. Now, in our current state of where we are, we live in a polarity world, a dualistic world. So you have the positive, the negative, the expansive, the collapsing, and so on and so on. Now, in that arena, you get to do both things. You get to do great good, or you can do great harm. That's part of the polarity experience. This energy exists beyond polarity. And this type of domain, if you like. That sounds a silly word, but it's so hard to put a word on it. This multidimensional field experience, let's call it that. One way to see it is, if you imagine an ocean, and let's say, just using the example of having some ping pong balls on the ocean. Now, as the ocean goes up and down, and the ping pong balls go up and down, and they're glowing, but the ocean is all dark. Now, when somebody measures, say, like an electromagnetic field, which is a polarity field, they see the up and down motion, they can measure the polarity, they can measure the positive, the negative, and so on and so forth. But what they don't see is the ocean that is underlying that motion. What they don't see is the processes behind that is fundamentally supporting that. You see, duality is an invented non-primary experience. You can collapse duality. You can bring the two poles back into the center point. And this is the interesting thing, because one of the Pleiadians once said, when humanity learns to understand the zero, and when they first said that, I thought, huh? What do you mean understand the zero? What, you mean like the number? And it took me a while to really appreciate what they were saying. I thought, they just kept bugging me. What is it about the zero, the zero, zero? A lot of people have talked about 0 point energy and the 0 point and all this kind of stuff. And there's so many different connotations that are floating around. But to me, it's when you counter-rotate fields to collapse the polarity and come back into the zero, that is when the energy emerges. That's where you see it. And this is the funny thing, because with the coiling system in John's systems and the ones that I made as well, you are doing just that. You are rotating in a helix fashion, and you are literally opening up a sort of a perception or a gateway to this energy that underlies what we call polarity existence, or the world of polarity. And so, like I said before, polarity is not a fundamental experience. It is a held in place experience for the purpose of learning between one side and the other, positive, negative, collapse, expansion, and so forth. So it's a realm of experience. But underlying that is an infinite, and when I say infinite, let me be clear what I mean by that. So in mathematics, infinity is more or less a sort of a term to describe, an uncountable amount, but it's still, in a sense, a kind of quantity. To me, infinity is not a quantity, it is a quality. It is the quality that appears when you collapse structure down, and what you have left is the infinite ocean of all potentials, that everything that can possibly be. A little bit like the ocean, where suddenly when you freeze parts of the ocean and they become little balls or particles, and then you make the structure of whatever you want to make, suddenly you're focused in the structure. Now you've lost perception of the infinite ocean that you were always a part of. And so structure itself is nested in that polarity, like atoms have positive charge, they have negative charge. There's all aspects of polarity built into what we see. And the way these beings operate is they operate in that realm beyond the polarity state, in that 0 point energetic. And it's such a vast field, of discussion in and of itself. But itself is a living energetic. It's conscious, it is aware, it is the intelligence that underlies everything and is within everything, and even underlies polarity itself. And so it's almost like, again, if within the ocean you could form one type of sort of ice ball and its opposite mirror image, that which would be the positive or the negative force, the polarity, and when you bring them together, they cancel each other and go back into the ocean again. So that's one way of seeing it. But coming back to what you were saying, the 0 point energy or source energy is biased for life. It will never direct anything in a way other than for more expansion and further life development. It doesn't destroy anything. You can only have the illusion of perception of destruction in the polarity world, where you focus on the negative, collapsing, destructive side of things, if you like.
But then isn't the polarity energy built upon the type of energy that you're describing, like the living energy that you're describing? and we are able to destroy using that energy.
Well, there's a difference between destructive, as in blitzing a life form to pieces, and then collapsing together. So I know what you're saying, but what I would say is that one way of looking at it is that, imagine, for example, one way they described it to me is, imagine you're in this ocean of infinity, and then I'd like an experience of structure, or say polarity, or so. How is that possible to make that? And so we have a mind field which has the ability to create all different possible scenarios. And one way I like to use the analogy is, imagine you put a virtual reality headset on, and it's so super realistic that you engage with this game that everything looks absolutely real. The feedback, the physical sensations, it's all super real. But the second you take the headset off, you realize, oh my God, I was playing in a holographic simulation. That's what it was all a part of. And so although you can create a number of different compressions and energetics from this source field that play in a certain way, and part of that process in the holographic form is that you have the positive, the negative, the expansive and collapsive, is that you have this experience where you can perceive to be doing harm to another. You can perceive to be, doing all sorts of things that, we won't mention here. But essentially, when all of that reality, those polarity points collapse back to the zero again, all of that apparition, if you like, that holographic presentation actually disappears. And so fundamentally, the reality we see in this polarity world is a world that we are requesting by the energy signature we give off. The quantum fields adjust themselves to give us exactly the kind of polarity experience that we're asking for. And so what the beings were saying is, and I've seen this myself, when you learn to start moving yourself down into that core intelligence, that stillness beyond polarity, your perception changes, and the energetic signature you give off is no longer a polarity request. It starts to become a unified field request. So you start seeing things in terms of that, not a polarity. In other words, the hologram that presents itself to you by your request of the energies you're giving off reshapes itself now to be one that is coming from here, not the mind, because the mind itself is a polarity creator.
And so this technology is coming through now, so we can be trusted with it, is what you're saying. Also, why is this coming more and more to the fore now? Is it incumbent upon us to start to come to terms with new energy structures? Because...
Yeah, it's, I believe that it's coming to the forefront now because, and it wasn't really possible back in Nikola Tesla's day. I mean, my view of what happened with Nikola Tesla, I know there's a lot of different things out there, but I think one of the aspects is that humanity consciously just wasn't ready to work with and literally coalesce with the type of energies that he was working with. Now, because of the polarity aspect, certain aspects of what he did could be used for both, good and the alternative. But the higher aspects of what he was working on were purely non-dualistic. They were non-polarity based. And so that level of technology just simply wasn't compatible with the current conscious state of the world at the time. That's my perspective on it. I know there are a lot of other things that did go on, and you can, talk about those who did what, when, where, how, and everything. But I believe that fundamentally his task was to seed in the ideas ready so that people could start on a collective conscious level, begin to start assimilating and work towards eventually, we're getting a better understanding. Our perspective is changing. But concurrently with that, we're going through this Earth ascension process. And there is this collective shift towards greater ascension, which to me is being fully embodied with the higher self within the heart intelligence itself, and having your body integrate with that higher aspect of yourself. Literally to ascend in conscious expansion is another way of looking at it. And so what we have is that this is happening in a more accelerated way. And as that happens, people's ability to perceive and see energetics they didn't see before, see emanations of this source intelligence in different forms, starts to come forward. And that opens up an entire paradigm within that group consciousness that allows these advanced technologies to be present. because it's, and one of the things that, I believe, the ETs with, the technologies they have, you could never get near their very advanced stuff, because the level of the energetic they operate at would simply be far too much for the current high compressed state of human consciousness to be where it is right now. It's too much of a stretch. It's too different. It's one of the aspects is like, I remember reading a witness report of some of the pilots in sort of the Second World War onwards that would try and get close to some of these craft. And they had experiences if they got too close that literally the rivets and the material would start to dissolve away as if it dematerialized. And I remember someone who was an experiencer saying to them, the beings that they met, saying, we wish pilots would stay away from our craft because the fields that they emanate are so fundamental in what they do. If you bring a material object near it, it's going to start changing the nature of the physics of the molecules, the material itself, the physical properties of materials, and it will start just gently falling to pieces. Because, you can't have such high compression in the presence of such advanced living energy technology. It has to change its form. So that's one way of looking at it. But I believe we're very, very slowly moving towards the point where, as a race, we're going to be becoming more open to and more facilitated to these very advanced living energy technologies. And these living energy technologies work symbiotically. So when they're emanating their fields, they don't harm anyone. They enrich and support and invigorate, there are so many experiences. And my experience when I have contact with these beings is the upliftment by, having this contact is so palpable. When you finish the meditation and you're sitting there, you feel like your entire body is enriched and enlivened. And it's one of the telltale signatures of these advanced beings, the living energetics that they emanate. It's very interesting because I recall, back in history when people used to talk about, these ascended beings or these masters that would come and they have this effervescence glow about them. And to me, in my perspective, that's a very visual piece of evidence that what was emanating from these people was actually this source energetic. They had such a very deep and open connection with this gateway inside them, which was the direct access to the source energetic, or the source intelligence, that it infused their cells, infused their DNA, and it would literally glow from them. And people would actually see this as almost a halo emission. And a lot of these beings, the very advanced ones that have that, they have that too. They simply literally, it looks like they're glowing, but literally it's this emanation glow of this source intelligence that comes from them, because their DNA, their cellular structure, it's all aligned as a perfect sort of almost optical fiber or conduit of that energy now. It doesn't block, it's not blocked from it. So there's a lot of things that we as humanity are going to be going through very step by step, because part of the issue over many lifetimes, and I know your audience will probably sit in different camps on that, but from my experience, we've had many different lifetimes to try to work off these filters that we have in place, work off the debris, the stuff that we've picked up, the energetics of fear, hate, violence, warfare, all that kind of stuff, because all of that effectively creates and adds to the emanation we give off. And the feedback we get from the outer world is exactly that. So what we're seeing going on around the world right now could be said that we are actually creating this by this collective emission we're giving off, because that is what we're requesting to see. And that in a way is a very empowering fact, because when you understand, oh, hang on a second, if I'm emitting this energy, I can change that. I can change what I broadcast. I can change what I'm requesting. And this is where the heart center comes in, because that has the ability to change and transform anything, any energetic, into something completely different, however you wish to. And that is where the human race is being offered the chance to go, if we wish to take it. And, that is part of the beautiful aspect of the source intelligence. It never forces anything. It's always an offering. It's like, you can stay here if you want to in duality and keep playing out this cyclical thing you're going through. Or you can come back into your truth, into your heart center, come back into the intelligence that you really are, and then work energetically by having access to all the fundamentals of how things really work, how matter really is formed, how objects, holographic objects really are. You have access to all of that. But to do that, you've got to go back in here and go back into the heart center. And so, yeah, that is part of the transformation I believe that humanity is going through. And all of the so-called symptoms, a lot of symptoms that people are experiencing, like ascension symptoms, they call it, like having really purgy days where they feel really rotten and really like, oh man, what am I still doing here kind of thing, you know. I believe that's all the part of the process of the shedding of all the densified layers that keep you anchored in this polarity experience. That when they're shed and removed, suddenly you have greater, deeper, more fundamental access to that source energetic that is beyond polarity inside. And the more you shed, the more greatly contrasted that becomes. And so that is how I see it in very simple terms.
How do people come into their heart and they're building that connection?
Yeah, there's a very simple process. We have a couple of meditations on our site which are completely free that people can do. I think it's numbers 14 and 15.
I'll put
And
a link
those
to them.
are the...
Yeah, I'll put a link to them in the
Oh,
description below.
yeah, definitely. You can go through that later on, but the numbers are 14 and 15. And those were the initial accessing of the Infinite Source Gateway and the changing of the fields within that heart field system to be able to more deeply anchor that source energetic into the heart fields and then into the back of the physical heart and the energetic heart, which some people call the heart chakra. Now, a very simple process that the teams always do when they bring through these meditations is what they call rhythmic breathing. And rhythmic breathing is very unique to each individual. It can be fast, it can be slow, it can be it's like a sweet spot of breathing. So as you breathe, you start to adjust your breathing, you'll feel a rhythmic sweet spot of the in-breath and the out-breath for you. And it's very unique to each individual. And what they encourage people to do is on each in-breath is to invite your higher self to infuse into you. And you almost feel like as you're breathing in, there's an energetic expansion, not just a physical lung expansion, but an energetic expansion that draws your higher self into the cellular structure and infuses your body, your cellular structure with the living intelligence of your higher self. And then you just keep breathing and breathing in, and you'll reach this state where you feel like this energetic is saturating you of your higher self. And then they go up through the different layers, the different levels of the higher self, usually up to about 8. So we're operating more or less at like a high third, lower fourth level, if you like. And so they bring people up to the 5th and then the 6th and 7th and then 8th. And it's such an elation experience, like you feel like your whole body is just saturated with this sweet, very playful, vastly intelligent energy. That's the only kind of words to describe it really. And at that point, you can then ask your higher self to take you into the gateway and open the gateway up as it's done in 14 and 15. Suddenly that gateway starts to open and starts to infuse that energy into you. And now you have the connection that's been made. It never really dropped away, but it dropped away to a significant portion where it seemed like it was lost or it had gone. It never truly had. And so what these meditations are designed to do is to re-empower people to connect really deeply inside and then to draw through the infusion of their own higher self, their source self, to begin a very accelerated process of self-expansion and advancement. And it's nothing, and I always say to people, this is already inside you. It's just waiting for your permission to come through and start moving you forward and upwards in a way of speaking it. And so it's really just a very, very powerful way of self-empowering and self-understanding yourself as a living energetic that's having a human physicality experience. So yeah, that's a very, very simple way, just using that rhythmic breath. You can do it any way you want to. You can be out in a park. You can be just before you go to bed. I like to do that. Just a few rhythmic breaths. infuse with the high self energetic before you go to bed or when you get up. And it feels absolutely just profoundly beautiful. It really does. So to any of your audience who's open to do it, just give it a try and see how you go.
Thank you so much for that. And then, yeah, I mean, you're saying this technology is coming off planet right now. So can you tell us a little bit about the different planets? I mean, I don't even know where to start this conversation really in many ways. You've mentioned Pleiadians, you've mentioned Arcturians. I mean, are there more? And then what are the differences between the planets and the sort of frequencies that you feel and the textures? And
yeah, it's an interesting mix. The way I understanding is this galaxy is teeming with life. The idea that we are somehow isolated and alone and it's a big dark universe out there, I don't buy that at all, and certainly not with the experiences I've had. What seems to happen is there is this honoring among the higher races that they don't interfere, because again, one analogy is with their ships when they do come close and then plays get close to them, because the living energy physics is so different, because lower energy physics has to give way to higher energy physics. It's just the way that energy systems work. Like you've heard the story that, if you really pour in compassion and love and empathy into parts of you that heal, the lower stuff has to give way. It can't stay there. That's just the way that, existence is, which is a beautiful thing, And so these races, they don't readily show themselves because they are waiting for humanity to start. They help from behind the scenes. So they help people via their higher selves. Suddenly you'll get an impulse one day, a new idea and your inspiration, or a feeling of something different. That's normally a sort of entourage that everybody has that they may or may not realize that is around them, helping them move forward with inspirations and solutions to things that they need to move through or things they need to learn. Now, coming back to your question, what seems to happen is that these advanced races have this very gentle but very sort of deep willingness to want to help humanity forward. But the request has to come from us, and they can only come so close in order to facilitate that, depending on how high they are. And each of these races has very particular qualities of energy, and sometimes, like I've talked about on other shows as well, I have these experiences where I go through a bilocation. So bilocation is where it's like an extension of, the remote viewing, but in a very different way. So you're physically here, you'll be in a meditative state, but then suddenly, like a remote viewing, as you're remotely perceiving somewhere, you'll have this very strong bilocation where you'll perceive as an overlay of both being here and where you are with these beings or on their craft. So I've had these experiences of having that, and it's really amazing because one of the first things they do, and you asked about the different qualities of these races, one of the first things they always do as trying to nurture and encourage humanity to become very responsible energy sensors and emitters, they will say, can you feel our energy and can you feel what we're about? Can you feel what we're really doing here? So, because, people can say all sorts of things, but you can't fool the energy. When you get close to somebody and they're saying something and it sounds really good, but energetically you think, I'm feeling a different vibe from you. That's not what I'm picking up. So you cannot fool the signature you give off. That is always being broadcasted and you can always sense that. And these beings always encourage, they're saying, can you start to learn to feel our energy? And having those experiences, you get to know them in the quality of their different energies. Some are more very deeply nurturing and compassionate. Some are more sort of very technologically orientated, where they focus very much on very advanced living energy technologies. And there's a big mix of different qualities. And I believe that's on purpose because it's almost like part of the universal creative experience when you create a vast spectrum of different qualities, of different focuses of different races. You have this massive plethora, this rich experiential playhouse of this galaxy, the solar system, the universe, and so on. But at the core of all of them, the advanced races that I've had contact with, is this immense depth of compassion and a willingness to enrich life, because that is the intelligence that comes from the source of them. And there's a lot of talk about other races that are not so nice and doing all sorts of other things. Well, what's been explained to me is that what happens there is that when a race becomes sufficiently detached or loses the connection of the source intelligence, instead of having that invigoration of compassion, of that high intelligence, of life expansion and bias for life, suddenly they lose that intelligent organization within their minds, within their physical cellular structures and so on. They become more dense. Then what takes over is survival. And when they go into survival mode and that goes too far, they get destructive. And they start to become territorial and grabbing and taking and all the other things that you see a lot of humans doing, these days. And what happens is a changeover when you start connecting with that source intelligence and you let it flood through, because it's really you. It's just part of the unified source version of you, and part of you is anchoring into the body. You're suddenly imbued with new ideas of compassion, of kindness, of super intelligence about different ideas. It's such a rich, it could go on forever about that. But that's what happens. There is this changeover, and suddenly you soften, your perspective enlarges, and suddenly, like I was saying about this new world of living energetics starts to open up. And that is where these beings operate. And their worlds are rich with this. I've also talked on different shows about, inner earth beings as well, because we have races and collectives that live in enormous caverns inside the earth. And the experience about going down to them is they have this similar thing. They're humanoid, they're just like us, deeply wish to have this experiential contact with humanity at large, but they're waiting for humanity to be ready. But they encourage humanity in many different steps to go within, connect with the source energy, imbue yourself with that fundamental truth that you are. It's about sort of surrendering to the true self that you are and letting go of what we think we know about ourselves, the ego aspects, the control aspects, the aspects of us that think, yeah, I've got a good grip on my life and everything is great. As long as I stay here, I'm gonna pile through life and everything's gonna be excellent. No, it won't. It's gonna be a mess. And what they were describing was that in their cities underground, they have these massive crystalline cities that are formed out of pure crystalline material. And it all has this effervescence glow because they work with that source energetic all the time. And it glows everywhere. And everything is so symbiotic and it's so nurturing from one thing to another. It's that, I believe, is a template or a future possibility of where we as humanity are heading, should we wish to continue to open up within and allow that source energetic to come fully within us and operate absolutely innately within us. So I hope that gives a little bit of a sprinkling, if you like, to your question about what these different races are like.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And you see key differences between, let's say, Pleiadians and Arcturians? You see key differences between them? Yeah,
there's difference in both, because a lot of them, the more high in vibrational energetic you go, the physical form starts to lose its compression, becomes more fluid-like, almost like a field. So there's a lot of people who talk about beings not even being incarnate in a physical body. Well, they're a field intelligence that can compress itself into a human form or a body form if they wish to. They don't readily do that because it takes quite a lot of, to compress yourself like that is quite a jump. But they can do that. And so you have this range in each of these different races, like the Pleiadians, like the Arcturians, that have both physical aspects, they have physical incarnations of their group intelligence. But then as you go higher, they become more morphic and more fluid and very expansive. And they communicate up and down with each other because it's all part of that one collective within particular races. And then within each different set of races, you've got this sort of super collective that, underlies them all. And so they have this wonderful symbiosis, these high races with each other. They communicate up and down and laterally with, races at their level as well. And there's this fantastic cooperation that's happening with these high races to try to help humanity and other planets that are going through difficulties like ours evolve past the trap of polarity. Evolve past the trap of literally creating a feedback loop. And this is another important aspect, because the Arcturians have said many times that one of the issues with humanity is that we have created a feedback loop of such density. We see the density, we reaffirm it, we then re-emit the same signal, and we keep compacting the idea of this is life, this is how it works, what we see around us is all we're going to get. No, nothing could be further from the truth. We're breaking out of the cycle of this self-created repetition of going into deeper and deeper density, and we're going the other way now. We're starting to learn about the fluidity, the expansiveness of living energetics, and how material structure is going to change its very nature because of that. And it's all completely one-to-one with us as we change our conscious perception, as we connect very simply. And there isn't anything complicated to it. It's just keep connecting within the heart center, keep inviting that energy to flood you, to saturate you, and to help you just expand and drop the dross that is part of this feedback loop that we've been creating, so that you can effortlessly and gracefully move into those higher states like these higher beings. And to come back to your question, so they have different sizes, different forms, like in the more physical sense of things. And depending on how, because the Arcturians are very adept, both spiritually and technologically, exceptional. I mean, the stuff they have, it's just, I'm sure I've only gotten a glimpse of just the tiniest pinprick of what they're capable of, and it's just all over the galaxy. They're a very revered race for what they can do. And the Pleiadians, the same, they go way up in vibration as well. And they're very, very heart-centered, very compassionate, very nature-orientated beings as well. And there's just a rich spectrum of all different races, different sides, different expressions, different talents and abilities, things they focus on as a race or individually within their races. And it's just, it really is profound. I believe that when we get to that threshold state, when they can start having more, contact with us without breaching those bounds of non-interference, we're going to get to understand just how teeming and alive this galaxy and the universe is. And right now, because of the experience that we as humanity are going through, so many eyes of all these advanced races are focused here right now, because they are really, because our genetic lineage, we actually have aspects of these master races within our DNA. They all contributed packets of that into our DNA. And so the abilities of the human being are truly profound. And what they are excited about is when we start to open up to that, and when those abilities become active, what will we do then? They are so excited to see what humanity is going to do. Because, humanity generally thinks of itself, well, I just get up in the morning, I have my coffee, I walk down, get me paper and, do my usual things, And the truth is that what we have inside us, I'm not spitballing here, not just being just fanciful. They've been very specific about this, that what we have inside us is going to blow our mind as to what we can do. The energetic abilities of our DNA, when it's fully functional, is off the charts. It really is. They are so excited to see where humanity is going to take this, And it's kind of funny when you think in contrast that people walk around in this massive potential physical form, not knowing exactly what's there and what's ready to be opened when they're ready to do it, And so that to me in itself is super, super exciting.
Well, that was going to be my question for you, is that have you been shown, or what do you see as we sort of step further and further into this, living energetics? Like what happens?
It really is, as they said to me, this can go as fast or as slow as you wish, or not at all, if you choose that. It's totally up to us. And one of the things that these groups have always said is what they'd love humanity to start doing is just doing that simple connection, however you do it. If you find a different way that works better for you, go for it. But connect within and start understanding who you are as the quality of infinity of the living source creative energy. Because as these races, for example, go more expanded and more expanded, their perception gets so large. In any instant, they can encompass, solar systems, even galaxies in their perception. That's how advanced. And it goes even further than that. That's, the potential of where we can get to. And our focus has been so confined to this little, earthly kind of experience, this physical experience. But as we learn to connect with there, suddenly there's an awakening that happens. And it's an awakening in many different ways. It's an awakening, an enlarging of the perception. It's an awakening of the sensitivity to energetics. And that's a very important one, because as we become sensitive to energies, we start to become aware of the nature of the living energetics, the potentials, everything that can be done with them. It's this rich evolutionary process that does involve this change in perception, change in energy sensitivity, and a change in what we broadcast, so that the outer world that we see mirrored that reflects our broadcast is going to change as well. But it is all up to us, and there's no push, there's no force, there's no request. It's an offering saying, hey, humanity, you have this as a possibility. It's always going to be there for you. You can put it on hold for a while if you want to, have a physical existence, do your whole, go down and, stuff your face with chocolate, coffee, whatever you want to do, or in addition to that, you can also have this experience where you start to build the bridge within. And that's an important thing, because if you think about it, what humanity's been trained to do is always focus outside, never within. And so we keep thinking we're just this biochemical mass that just goes around. We have an intellect, we have memories, we can do X, Y, Z, we can be engineers, scientists, artists, runners, you name it, we can be all of those things. But how many people actually stop to say, well, okay, what is actually inside? I've had a good exploration of everything outside of me. What truly it lies within the center of me that I've never paid attention to and was always there. Because when you do that, when you have that access point, you'll suddenly realize the answer to every question you've ever wanted is right there and waiting. You ask it, you get it right there. The solution to everything you've ever gone through is right there. And this isn't airy-fairy talk, and I think as coming from a theoretical physics background, helps people to really give a little bit more credibility to this, is that having had these experiences, the understanding that is given from this place when you connect with it and you ask questions is profound. And even helping with other people, you just, somebody say, I'm going through this thing, right? I don't understand what I'm going through. Suddenly you'll have this complete map of all the energetics that's going on inside them. And you could say, oh, you've got this, and this, and this. And as soon as they become aware of that, it just falls away. And suddenly, whoa, I'm suddenly feeling a lot better all of a sudden. The clarity of perception of energy and us as a living being really starts to open up, and it becomes simple. And this is another thing that the races such as the Arcturians and the Pleiadians say, it's keep it simple. Don't complicate it. If you think too much, you're complicating it already. It is a very gentle, peaceful, experiential process, and if you find yourself getting too heady about it, there you're already going off down the wrong path. It's, and it's a trick, isn't it? Because as humanity, we've always been trained to do, think, and nothing else. But to come inside and just be completely merged with that source intelligence, where everything that you've ever wanted to have access to is right there, that is a very, very different experience than what we have had as human beings so far. And it's something that just each of us has to do. It's nothing, I can say words, I can give you descriptions of my experiences, but until a person actually does it themselves and actually feels the difference in perception, feels what actually happens when you open that gateway and you connect with the source intelligence within, that's something no one else can actually tell you about. You just have to do yourself.
You stopped my question dead in its tracks, because I was going to ask you a question from the mind, which was going to be, what happens for natural resources and stuff like that, because there is so much of this economic sort of stuff that we do around resources and stuff like that. And then I was like, Oh, you're in your mind. Stop it. But yeah, it was just this last little question around, like, I guess the mind still has its curiosities, right, and its propensities. But yeah, you know, like, because I mean, if we start, so much of commerce and everything is based upon energy and energy flow and stuff like that. I mean, if we step further and further into these paradigms that you're inviting us into, I mean, it does disrupt and shift quite a bit. And I'm conscious we're just talking about, like, energy is, you know, we're not even looking at the medicinal side of, like, all of this and what comes downwind from it. There's many domains that we haven't even brought into the light here. I mean, it probably disrupts a lot of the way that we currently view the world. Well, yeah, and also the future impacts could be quite disruptive for the way that things currently are. They probably do need to be disrupted, as you know, but I'm just that's in my awareness at this point.
One way to think, that's a good question. I've never been asked that one before. One way to think about it is that in the paradigms that have been, where humanity has been very survival focused and almost egotistically focused, and the ego is just a complex of programs running for survival essentially, is that in the mix then and because of the compression of the materials on the earth, there's been this sort of perception of finiteness, or, you know, there's only so much to go around and so on and so forth. But one of the things that's going to change is that, and come into play, is that as humanity, if they choose to be more centered within that unlimited source intelligence within, the nature of materials around them are going to start to change. The nature of how the energetics of those materials behave is going to change. You can already see that a little bit in water, how water responds to energetic shifts, conscious impressions, all those kind of things. You can actually see and measure that in crystallization right now. So we're getting close to a threshold. Now, the other thing is, when you remember that all the physical structure is underlined. Do you remember, actually, a good way of seeing this, do you remember, what are they called now? Those things, that lots of little pins, and you put your face in it, and it makes like an impression of your face as the pins pop out.
My kid has one of those right now.
Oh yeah, you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
So in a way of seeing, if you imagine just an infinite landscape of those, and particles are just pop-ups of those. So there isn't, in truth, a scarcity of structure around. What humanity needs to do is understand that, see, part of the aspect of limitation we're facing is the feedback that we create, that there is limitedness, that there is only so much to go around. It's another part of the human psyche, the program of the feedback loop that we're doing. And that's what's going to change, because as that changes and our outer reality starts to change because of that reflective change within us, we begin to understand there has never been limitation. There has never been lack. This is something that we have created ourselves through feedback, that there is, can't get something for nothing. It's always limited. There's always scarce resources. Do you know those programs? They're so common. Everybody has been trained to believe them from birth. And I'll give you an example. There's a story about a young child, I believe is in South America. He never had access to mainstream education, but he used to keep geckos as pets since he was very young. And he always used to see them lose their tails and then they would grow back. So in his perception, if they lose a tail, it grows back. And something happened to him when he was, I think it was just before he reached his teenage years. I'm not sure. He had an accident and lost the bottom part of his leg. But because of his perception and his belief system of feedback, it actually grew back. The whole leg actually grew back. And doctors were like, what the heck? That shouldn't happen. But that gives you a great example. And there are many other situations I've seen that people have posted about these stories about people having different things like that. His reality creation was one that, yeah, of course it grows back. Geckos do it all the time. That's commonplace, right? Not to people who believe otherwise. You see, the lensing of your belief systems is what filters the reality you perceive. So if you believe when you get your leg chopped off that it's not going to grow back, guess what? And people might say, oh yeah, but that's just waffle talk. Well, we have examples of like this in the world of people who didn't believe like that. They didn't perceive it like that. And lo and behold, it did grow back. I even saw a video of this lady. She was taking part in this ceremony, she had a mangled up arm caused by a birth defect or something. And they were doing this almost tribal chant around this woman. And literally in real time, her arm was unfolding and growing back into a right in front of the camera. It was crazy to watch it. And, you know, it's, to me, this is one of the facets of the huge potential that humanity is growing into. Some people have these aspects already functioning, I believe. This is just from my perspective. I could be wrong, but this is the way I see it. And this is the thing, that when we are able to change our perception and offload those very faulty paradigms of lack, limitation, not enough, you can only get what you pay for, blah, 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 you know, to think that, and I always ask this question to physicists, it's like, well, if you can't get something for nothing and everything is limitation, where did all the structure in this universe come from? And who on earth organized it in such a beautiful, intelligent, symmetrical way as what we see? How did that happen? Silence. You know, it can't be answered like that, because they always think in terms of, you know, energy conservation, second law of thermodynamics. You know, nothing organizes itself; it just goes bleh eventually, and just. But that's another thing I say to them: look at the universe. Do you see an entropic failure where everything has just gone bleh into this chaotic mess? No. You look at any galaxy out there, has this beautiful structure to it that is held in place in ways that physicists don't fully understand. And you look at the entire universe as a whole, this is intelligent design. This isn't an accident, you know. And the same holds true down here, except that the bulk of humanity believes against itself. We believe that we are inherently limited. We believe that we can't get something for nothing. We believe that we have to suffer and strive and do X, Y, Z to get what we need to get. All of those are perception filters, paradigms, programs that we keep putting into place, and we keep wondering why we get those feedbacks in our reality. Well, it's because of those. And, you know, to this day, my teams keep coming in and saying, yep, another reality filter, you need to get rid of that one there, you know, and they're helping me sort of clear off the dross in that way. And the changes that take place when you clear those filters from yourself are really genuinely profound. Like, you'll have some situation in your life and it's really bothering you, and okay, what is it? What am I emanating? What filter do I have that is requesting this situation to be here in my life? Okay, I see it now. Clear it, go through the process. You can ask your higher self to literally break it down, wash out the energetics, and replace it with your higher self intelligence. Suddenly the situation disappears or diffuses in ways that you don't even expect it to. It's very quick how it happens. And again, it's all to do with the perceptions of how we broadcast our requests of how we want to see reality.
Dr. David Clements.
Sorry, I tend to go on and on a bit.
No, you could go on and on. I'm so sort of sad. The time has flown in this podcast, Touchwood. And
I know, right?
I mean, thank you so much for, being here, sharing yourself so openly and so abundantly here with us today. And also, you can tell that this is your life's work that we get to revel in, you know, all the different domains, you know, in traditional academia versus your own curiosities, and then, you know, deep explorations where I'm sure, you know, it seems like you're very open, but even coming from traditional academia, I'm sure there was points where, you know, your sensibilities were challenged significantly, stepping into the domains and spaces you've been stepping into, you know. So I just want to, thank you for today's conversation, but also thank you for you. You know, it's not always easy, especially the space and the domain that you're occupying for where you are right now. And yeah, there's many people that probably challenge certain things that, you know, you have to say and share. And I think it takes a certain type of character to step into the role that you are. So thank you for you. Really, thank you so much for you. Yeah, appreciate you coming on today and sharing yourself here with us. And like I said, links to the meditations and your work, I'll put it all in the show notes in the description below. And thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. And I just like to add that, you know, for me, doing this is an act of joy in the way that I take great pleasure and joy in giving people empowering information that whatever aspect they want to take of it, whether it's 5% of it, 50%, doesn't matter. It's what works for you to help you remember who you really are and get back into your own self-empowerment. And I always say to people, when people start talking to me as if they're revering me, I say, no, you need to stop that. You have access to exactly the same things I do. All you need to do is go inside and connect. That's all it is. And that's what I'm a big believer in, that, it's all about people self-empowering and releasing those faulty paradigms. And imagine, what I've seen with those races down underneath in those cabins and up there as well. They live in such symbiotic harmony because they have such a deep connection. They instantly feel the needs and the wishes of others. They can work so symbiotically. They don't have conflict. We have conflict because of those lingering egotistical take survival programs. But as we move away from that into deeper self-empowerment, we will innately gain that beautiful super intelligence inside of us, which knows exactly how to make the most joy for you and everybody else that's around. That's the beauty of it. It's pure joy.
I love it. And you can see it emanating off you. So touch it. Thank you so much again. Appreciate
You're
it.
very welcome. Yeah, lots of love to you. Thank you for inviting me on, and lots of love to your audience as well. I hope you enjoy this information.
Alrighty, Inspired Soul, you've made it through to the end of another Inspired Evolution podcast. Thank you so much for your inspiration to evolve. I'm so inspired by your persistence, your diligence, your dedication to your inner work to evolve. On screen right now is an opportunity for you to continue your inspirations and to keep the evolution flowing. There are a couple of episodes on screen which are two personal favorites of mine. As always, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It helps so much more than we can say. This entire channel is powered by your subscription. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.